Hey Dream Chasers, it's Jacey. Today I'm going to show you step by step how I create an emote for Twitch. Full disclosure, this video has a very brief promo at the end for Fiverr where you can hire someone to make emotes for you if you don't want to do it yourself. Emotes can be made in pretty much any art program as long as it has layers. I usually use Photoshop, but you can make emotes using Clip Studio Pro or Krita, which is a free program. Any art program is fine, you don't need something really fancy or expensive. To start, I'm going to make my file size 500 by 500 pixels at 72 pixels per inch, also known as dots per inch or DPI. The largest emote size that you need for Twitch is 112 by 112, but I like to start a little bit bigger because it's easier to hide your mistakes when you shrink your artwork down. So if you have kind of shaky lines or your shading isn't perfect, no one's going to be able to tell. The other perk to working at this size is it's big enough that you can actually use your emotes for prints like stickers or mugs. I don't like to go much larger than this though, because if it's too big, it ends up looking kind of muddy when you shrink it down, and you waste a lot of time adding details that you're never going to see. We'll resize the artwork when it's done to the correct sizes that Twitch needs, so for anyone taking notes, you're going to need 3 PNGs at 112 by 112, 56 by 56, and 28 by 28. So let's figure out what kind of emote we want to draw. Emotes can be anything. You can have an emote that's just a grilled cheese sandwich if you want, which Dylan Griffin has, and I love it. But usually they're used to convey an emotion of some kind. So for this example, we're going to draw a person laughing. My advice is don't be afraid to get really cartoony with your emotes. You're basically designing a chibi or an emoji. And sometimes I actually will Google chibi expression or emoji expressions to get ideas. You don't want to copy or trace any of those, but you can learn things about how to convey emotions as simply as possible. So looking at examples of laughing emotes, I found that a lot of them include tears to indicate that someone's laughing so hard they're crying. I see a lot of people with their heads tilted back, big wide mouths. So I'm going to take all those features and incorporate them into my emote, but kind of make them my own. So for the sketching phase, I like to start with a thin pencil brush that kind of has a real natural pencil feeling, just so I can stay really loose and get some basic shapes down. And I just start off roughing in sort of the shape of the head and the basic expression and add in more details. And I go really big with the features like eyes and mouth because I want the expression to read. And I don't even include noses in emotes most of the time because they're not that important to the expression and you don't have a lot of space to work with. So I really just emphasize the eyes and the mouth. One thing I want to mention is that during the sketch phase, you want to make sure that you're filling the entire canvas. You have this little square box shape that you're working with, and you really don't want to have a lot of empty space in your sketch because emotes are small, and it's important to make sure you fill that space as much as possible and make sure that things are really reading clearly. And sometimes that means that you're going to have to cut things off a little bit or get creative with your placement, but it's important so you can tell what you're looking at. And usually with art, we try not to crowd our drawing. We try to make sure that nothing gets cut off. But in emotes, it's actually fine if you cut off, part of the hair or an accessory or something, if it means you can see the expression better. The next step is the line art. My advice here is don't be afraid to make the line art really thick. A lot of the time your lines seem thick enough when you're working at a large size, but then when you shrink it down, they're actually really thin and they kind of get lost. So play around with your line weight, try to make your lines kind of thick, shrink down the emote, preview it at a small size, and make sure that you can see all of the lines clearly, and just keep adjusting until it looks right to you. And by the way, I just want you to know that line art is really hard. So please don't worry if this stage takes a long time for you. Just keep practicing and you will get better at it. I still will redraw lines over and over again and erase things and make lots of changes. It's very difficult to do. If you have a program that includes some kind of smoothing, make sure you turn it on, and just be patient with yourself and practice, and you got this. Once your line art is done, it's time to fill in your flat colors. Color theory is a whole topic on its own, so I'm not going to be able to cover all of it in this video, but I'll give you a few tips that I think are helpful. My first tip is make sure you don't go too bright. A lot of beginners in digital art choose really bright, highly saturated colors, And don't get me wrong, I love me some bright colors, but when you're hanging out on the far right of a color picker, you're in eyesore territory. Those colors should really be reserved for light sources and things that are glowing. Move your eyedropper over towards the center a little bit more and you'll get better results. I know it's not as bright, but trust me, those colors in the center will actually still look really bright in your art. My next piece of advice is about skin tones. Skin tones are really hard to learn. A lot of artists choose colors that make characters look kind of a natural. They either make them too pale or too yellow or very desaturated and gray, and the skin looks kind of lifeless. Your first guess is probably off a little bit from what actually is going to look good in art, so pay attention to what other artists are doing, especially if you're not used to certain types of skin tones or if you're not good at drawing darker skin tones. Look at artists who are good at that, color pick what they're doing, and try to learn something from it and really pay attention to those colors. And finally, pay attention to the overall contrast of your emote. Contrast is so important in emotes because when they're shrunken down, your eye can only make out the basic shapes. And if you're relying too much on your line art, your emotes will look like blobs at a small size. If you can't tell if your emote has enough contrast, look at it in grayscale. If all the colors seem to be the same shade of gray, then you need more contrast. Mouths are especially easy to do that with. If you choose a pink that's too similar to the value of your skin, it's gonna blend in. If your character is really pale, try a darker pink or a red for the mouth so it stands out when you shrink it down. I prefer colored line art to black lines on emotes. I feel that black lines can make your emotes look kind of muddy and hard to read at a small size, and everything ends up looking kind of gray. I think that the different line colors help separate each section a little bit better. So I usually make my lines a slightly darker version of the section that they're lining. So I'll just color pick that section from my flats, and then I'll choose a color that's a little bit darker and make that my line color. And there are tons of ways to color your line art, but a really easy way to do it is lock your layer and just draw right over it. That said, I usually leave the outline of the eyes black because I think that they read really well that way, and you want to really draw focus to the eyes since that's such a big part of the expression. So for shading, I would say keep it pretty simple with emotes. It's really tempting to add a ton of details, and I think it's not always a good idea because when you resize your emotes to a small size, a lot of those details get lost and you can't really see them. I would say look at other emote artists and pay attention closely to how they shade their work and what they're doing. Most of them keep stuff pretty simple. I usually start with really soft gradients for my shadows to kind of make things look round. Like I might put a soft shadow along the cheek to kind of round out the face. And then I'll switch to a harder brush when I'm adding in drop shadows and highlights. And sometimes I'll soften those with a soft brush. Again, if they look a little harsh, I'll make a new layer and just kind of go over that. And please be mindful that if your shadows and your highlights are too small, they're not going to read at a small size, so don't be afraid to make them a little bit thicker. I also recently started adding these colored highlights to emotes. Originally, I didn't think they would read. I thought they wouldn't show up or they'd be too busy, but they actually look really nice, and they help separate the emote from a dark background, which is great because emotes can be really hard to read against a dark background sometimes depending on what colors you have and what your line art is like, so this is a nice trick to make your emote pop a little bit more. This emote doesn't have any text, but since it's very common in emotes, I wanted to touch on it quickly. As a rule, I suggest keeping your text to 4 or 5 letters maximum. I broke that rule with my no chill emote, but that was my first emote and I struggled a lot with the text. I changed it a million times before I got to the point where it could read, and it's still not quite perfect. And finally, it's time to test your emote. I really like the contrast tool, which can be found at twitch-contrast.firebaseapp.com. And when you upload your emote, it automatically appears on both light mode and dark mode backgrounds, so you can see both. And you can click on your emotes to flip them to see what they look like in either direction. And there's also a smaller upload box where you can upload sub badges and see how those look in chat as well. It's a very cool tool. You don't have to export all 3 sizes to use it. You can upload the one that you've been working at and the app will automatically adjust it for you. It doesn't export them for you, which would also be cool, but... So that's my process for designing an emote. I really hope that this video was helpful. And by the way, I do sometimes take emote commissions. If you're interested, please check my Twitter or my Twitch panels to see if I have commissions open before you reach out. And if I don't have them open, or you want to hire someone else, you can check out Fiverr. They have a Twitch store where you can hire someone to make your emotes, Twitch panels, overlays, or any graphics you need for Twitch. There's a link where you can sign up in the description. And full disclosure, for the sake of transparency, it is an affiliate link, so I do make a little bit of money when you sign up and hire someone through that link. If you have any questions about designing emotes, please ask me in the comments, not in my DMs or email. I'm sorry, but I get way too many messages and I can't answer them all, and it helps me a lot to answer those kinds of questions in the comments because other people who have the same question can read it and everybody can get all the answers they need. I don't get repeat questions. It's very, very helpful. So if you do that, you're awesome. Thank you so much. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, chase your dreams. Peace.